Jane Austen is, without a doubt, the most famous romance author of all time. It is her books that we as readers keep coming back to time after time for inspiration and for hope that even a plucky, down on her luck protagonist might find a Mr. Right who also happens to be fabulously wealthy. This is why, with maybe the exception of Shakespeare, Austen has had more TV and film adaptations than any other author. I'd list them here, but that would be the entire video. On the Jane Austen subreddit, one user made a list of all of the adaptations and retellings of her novels, and the list is over 40 versions, with commenters adding in more that were forgotten originally. It is, therefore, somewhat surprising that her first novel, Sense and Sensibility, her first published novel, I should say, isn't really a true romance. Not that there isn't a romantic subplot in the novel, there is, but that subplot is what a subplot. The main plot focuses more on the relationships between the two protagonists, Eleanor and Marianne, who are sisters, than it does on their eventual romance. In fact, to the point that Marianne Dashwood actually only falls in love with her future husband in the last chapter of the novel itself. And before that, they barely interact at all. So, if this isn't a romance novel, then what is it? Well, that's the question I would like to answer in this video. Hello, I'm Steven, and this is Reading with Steven. And more specifically, this is a Bookshelf A to Z series where I have the project of reading all of my books, at least the literary ones, from A to Z by author's last name. And today we're doing the first of 5 Jane Austen novels, Sense and Sensibility. On his deathbed, Henry Dashwood makes his son John promise to provide for his stepmother and half-sisters Eleanor, Marianne, and Margaret from his inheritance. John's wife Fanny instead persuades him not to support them financially, leaving them at a greatly reduced income. Fanny's brother, Edward Ferrars, arrives for a visit. When he and Eleanor seem to be growing close, Fanny warns Mrs. Dashwood that their mother has higher goals for Edward. Affronted, Mrs. Dashwood moves her family to Barton College in Devonshire, which her second cousin, Sir John Middleton, offered for a low rent. Later, while dining with the Middletons at Barton Park, family friend Colonel Brandon is attracted to Marianne. However, he is aged 35, which seems too old to 16-year-old Marianne's romantic sensibilities. While out walking, Marianne sprains her ankle. John Willoughby happens upon her and carries Marianne home. During subsequent visits, their similar artistic tastes causes Marianne to fall in love with him, abandoning caution and propriety. Just as an engagement seems imminent, Willoughby informs the Dashwoods that his elderly cousin, Mrs. Smith, whom he is financially dependent upon due to his debts, is sending him to London indefinitely on business. Marianne is left distraught. When Edward Ferrars visits Barton College, he seems subdued. Shortly afterwards, sisters Anne and Lucy Steele, vulgar cousins of Sir John's mother-in-law, Mrs. Jennings, stay at Barton Park. While there, Lucy confides to Eleanor that she and Edward are secretly engaged, giving Eleanor an insight into Lucy's jealousy and calculating nature. Mrs. Jennings invites the elder Dashwood sisters to visit her in London. After Marianne's letters to Willoughby go unanswered, they unexpectedly meet at a ball. Willoughby, there with another woman, greets Marianne coldly, later informing her that he is betrothed to the rich Miss Grey. Marianne is heartbroken, but tells Eleanor that she and Willoughby never were engaged. Colonel Brandon reveals to Eleanor that Willoughby had earlier seduced and abandoned Brandon's teenaged ward, Eliza Williams. Willoughby's cousin has consequently disinherited him, which explains his need to marry an heiress. Meanwhile, the Steele sisters come to London and are invited to stay at John and Fanny Dashwood's London house in preference to Eleanor and Marianne. Based on their cordiality, Anne mistakenly believes that the Ferrars have become fond enough of Lucy to welcome her into the family and reveals Lucy's engagement to Edward. As a result, the sisters are dismissed from the house, and Edward's wealthy mother orders him to break off the engagement. When Edward refuses, he is disinherited in favor of his younger brother. On learning this, Colonel Brandon shows his admiration for Edward's honorable conduct by offering him the nearby parsonage, allowing him and Lucy to marry after he is ordained. Mrs. Jennings takes the Dashwood sisters to visit her second daughter as they journey back to Devonshire. Marianne goes walking in the rain and contracts putrid fever. When Marianne's condition worsens, Eleanor writes home. Colonel Brandon, who lives nearby, volunteers to bring Marianne's mother. That night, Willoughby arrives. He tells Eleanor that he genuinely loved Marianne. However, the callous way he talks about Eliza and his wife lessens Eleanor's pity for him. Marianne recovers and, learning of Eleanor's own silent heartbreak, is ashamed of her ostentatious grief and vows to be guided by her sister's good sense and amend her future behavior. After their return home, a family servant happens to encounter Lucy at a nearby market town and brings back news that she is now Mrs. Ferrars. This final act of spite becomes obvious when Edward arrives to reveal that Lucy had jilted him and married his now wealthy younger brother. After being ordained, Edward marries Eleanor, while Marianne later marries Colonel Brandon. The two sisters can now harmoniously live as neighbors. So, as I said, Sense and Sensibility isn't a real romance. As you might have gathered from the plot overview, there's not very much romance that does happen in the book, other than Marianne's failed relationship with Willoughby and Eleanor spending the entire novel pining after Edward Ferrars. But I think to really understand the question, why is it not a romance? What is it if not a romance? I think we need to discuss first what is a romance to begin with. For that, we go to our trusty. I can't pick it up. It's upside down. Our trusty Dictionary of Literary Terms and Literary Theory, which I shall then put back. For a definition of what romance is. And in it, we learn that romance is originally those tales of knights and chivalric adventures from the medieval period, which, unlike most literature at the time, which was written in Latin, the scholarly and international language was rather written in the Romance languages of French, Italian, and Spanish, hence romance. It wasn't until the 18th century and the 19th century that it would become less attuned to knights and chivalry, and more attuned to the heightened sense of attaining those, that you would see that during what is conventionally known as the Romantic period. However, how did we get from that to what we today think about romance? And the answer is, of course, two publishing companies. The first was Mills and Boon, located in London, which was founded in the 20th century as a publisher of women's escapist fantasy. And that fantasy tended to follow the somewhat out-of-fashion romantic ideals of the 19th century with high drama and fantastical settings. But also, because it was women's literature, it had always included a love plot prominently featured. Eventually, of course, these would get flanderized over and over again until you get to what we today would consider a romance novel. But we haven't gotten there yet, because in the 1940s and 50s, a new publishing house, well, I don't know if they really count as a publishing house, but Harlequin Enterprises ULC was founded in Edmonton, Canada. I think it was Edmonton, Canada. And their role was not to publish new written books, but rather to republish as cheap paperbacks previously printed books. In the 1950s, the founder of Harlequin would become sick, and his wife would take over. His wife, big fan of Mills and Boon published works, focused the company on those works specifically, eventually making so much money doing so that they were able to purchase Mills and Boon outright and become the leading publisher of what we today consider romance novels, or as some of you might recognize, Harlequin romance books. And thus, they were able to change the definition of romance from chivalry and drama to conventional and, if somewhat poorly written, love stories. We actually have a few, although they aren't Harlequin romances, but there are a few romance novels on my bookshelf, although I don't know. I think there's one in the Bees, but I look forward to reading it. It'll be a quick read. They are quick reads. They're only like 250 pages or something, but I look forward to reading it. Although they aren't Harlequin romances, so they won't be spicy, if you will. Incidentally, by the way, Harlequin is now owned by HarperCollins because there's only like 3 publishers like in the world. So that's a rant for another time, but it's just sad. It's just, the state of publishing is yikes. Obviously, Austen doesn't fit into the idea of romance as it was understood at the time. There's nothing chivalric or fantastical about her novels, except maybe the incomes of the leading gentleman. But they are novels written by a woman for a primarily female audience about topics that ostensibly women would be interested in, namely what a good marriage partner looks like, what one should expect from marriage, and how possibly to get a good husband. Because of that, she was lumped in with the Harlequin romances, and thus, regardless of any literary merit on her part, and the social commentary that is rife within her works, she is now known as an escapist romance author. Because it's because she's a woman. Let's call a spade a spade. It's because she's a woman. That's why she's a romance author. Her plots deal with love, and she's a woman. Now, I will say that this is unfair. First off, because I think it is diminishing to Jane Austen, but also because, as I said earlier, Sense and Sensibility is not a love story. Not in the way that one would think of a love story based on a Harlequin romance. Leaving aside the lack of any spice, if you will, as the youths today refer to it, there's hardly any love at all. Eleanor and Edward Ferrars barely interact, although Eleanor does pine after him throughout the novel. And Marianne, though she does have a brief love affair with Willoughby, she spends more time being sad about their breakup than she does actually being in the relationship with Willoughby. And further, as I said in the introduction, she only falls in love with her future husband in the last chapter of the novel. Before then, she just kind of makes fun of him and calls him an old man. And then at the end, she's in love. So, does that really count as a romance? I don't think so. Not in the traditional 18th century idea of it, or 19th century idea of it, and certainly not in the modern idea of what a romance is. If the story doesn't revolve around a love plot, then what is the main plot of the book? What is the book if not a love story? And I would argue that it is, in fact, a Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age novel, with the person coming of age being Eleanor and Marianne. Marianne more so than Eleanor, but Eleanor still too. So first, we have to look at how they're described at the beginning of the novel. Eleanor, this eldest daughter whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother, and enabled her frequently to counteract, to the advantage of them all, that eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood which must generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart, her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of her sisters had resolved never to be taught. Marianne's abilities were, in many respects, quite equal to Eleanor's. She was sensible and clever, but eager in everything. Her sorrows, her joys, could have no moderation. She was generous, amiable, interesting. She was everything but prudent. The resemblance between her and her mother was strikingly great. So we are left with that description of Eleanor and Marianne. Marianne, not a bad person, is ostensibly a pretty good person, albeit a somewhat thoughtless one. Want to give way to her emotions, as many characters of the Romantic era, which is beginning with Austen, but really wouldn't come to its fruition until later, as many of those characters would find themselves. Marianne is a Jane Eyre-esque character. But unlike Jane Eyre, who is rewarded for her emotionality, Marianne is punished because Jane Austen is really an 18th century. She's romantic period, and she's more of an Enlightenment writer, if you will. Jane Austen is writing characters where sense is more important than emotion. Hence, why Eleanor is considered the better of the sisters than Marianne is, at least at the beginning of the novel. Now, Marianne is not a bad person, as she was described, but several times throughout the novel, she is either unintentionally or even intentionally rude to other characters, whether it's getting up mid-conversation to go play piano or walking out of the room when people come to visit her that she doesn't want to talk to. Things that I think are understandable, but again, somewhat rude. At one point, she even openly mocks Colonel Brandon, her future husband, to his face with Willoughby. She is a pretty, vivacious woman, and despite her ostensible rudeness, is someone that people like to be around. I think an easy comparison in the novel would be to compare Marianne to, say, Mrs. Middleton or to Fanny, who, while both young and pretty, are very cold and judgmental women that people don't really like that much, other than the fact that they're wealthy. People like wealthy people. Back then, they did. Today, they do too. No comment on who would be liked because of their money today. Probably one of her greatest faults, though, and one that the novel takes the greatest pains to make fun of, is the fact that Marianne, as a young woman, I believe she's 16 years old, believes that love is this bright, eternal thing, that you only fall in love once, and that only the youth fall in love. Old people don't fall in love, and they certainly don't fall in love a second time. Now, this is obviously a hilarious belief, given that her mother was her father's second wife, so she's the child of a second marriage, but also because, as she will grow to find out throughout the novel, actually, older people, and by older people I mean people in their 30s, not like old people, but older than her, do fall in love passionately, i.e. Colonel Brandon. A small note: there is a large age gap between Colonel Brandon and Marianne, one which today would be frowned upon. I do think we need to give the novel a benefit of the doubt. That was not the most uncommon thing at the time, and Marianne would not have been considered a child at 16. Whether we consider her to be a child today is irrelevant to the facts of the novel at the time. And I think we just need to... I think it's best if we just move on from there. Like, just leave it for what it is. It's just one of those things. It's a time capsule of the time in which it was written. We can see Marianne's views on love when she is discussing with Eleanor the prospect of Colonel Brandon. Quote, "I know very well that Colonel Brandon is not old enough to make his friends yet apprehensive of losing him in the course of nature. He may live 20 years longer, but 35 has nothing to do with matrimony." "Perhaps," said Eleanor, 35 and 17 had better not have anything to do with matrimony together. But if there should be any chance, by any chance, happen to be a woman who is single at 7 and 20, I should not think Colonel Brandon's being 35 any objection to to his marrying her. A woman of 7 and 20, said Marianne, after pausing a moment, can never hope to feel or inspire affection again, and if her home be uncomfortable, or her fortune small, I can suppose that she might bring herself to submit to the offices of a nurse for the sake of the provision and security of a wife. In his marrying such a woman, therefore, there would be nothing unsuitable. It would be a compact of convenience, and the world would be satisfied. In my eyes, it would be no marriage at all. But that would be nothing. To me, it would seem only a commercial exchange, in which each wished to be benefited at the expense of the other. This is the argument of youth, no doubt. The idea that women of 27 are ugly and past their prime, and men of 35 are without passion. It's a clearly facetious argument, and one which Marianne will get her comeuppance with, and certainly be made fun of for having it. Eleanor, being the more prudent and less dictated by passion, realizes that one, that her father was old when he married his wife, their mother, and two, that their mother was the second wife, and that their parents were in love with each other. So how could it be possible that older people don't have passion? So there are two moments. The two main moments which cause Marianne to rethink her worldview are her love affair with Willoughby and their consequent breakup, and the illness that she contracts afterwards. Her love of Willoughby is a devastating one to her. It goes without saying, since it causes her to become depressed and ultimately leads to her becoming sick. But it should be explored, why is it so powerful? As mentioned, Marianne is a very emotional girl who has romantic in the sense of both the chivalric and the Harlequin romance ideas of romance, notions about love and beauty and happiness. Willoughby is a handsome, young man who saves her when she sprains her ankle, fits perfectly into her notions of what a good romantic partner would be. Willoughby, on his side, gave every proof of his pleasure in their acquaintance, which an evident wish of improving it could offer. He came to them every day. To inquire after Marianne was at first his excuse, but the encouragement of his reception, to which every day gave greater kindness, made such an excuse unnecessary before it had ceased to be possible, by Marianne's perfect recovery. She was confined for some days to the house, but never had the confinement been less irksome. Willoughby was a young man of good abilities, quick imagination, lively spirits, and open, affectionate manners. He was exactly formed to engage Marianne's heart, for with all this he joined not only a captivating person, but a natural ardor of mind, which was now roused and increased by the example of her own, and which recommended him to her affection beyond everything else. Every character is under the impression that these two are going to get married. Mrs. Jennings believes that they're going to get married. They're making fun. Eleanor believes that they're getting married. Mrs. Dashwood believes that they're getting married, to the point that even after Willoughby leaves, they assume that they have made an engagement, a secret engagement, because of Willoughby's position, but an engagement nonetheless. And it comes as a surprise later on that they weren't engaged at all. That though Marianne and Willoughby's relationship was close and arguably inappropriate, given the fact that they weren't engaged, they weren't engaged, and this of course sets Marianne up for the failure, or up for the heartbreak that will occur when, in town, Willoughby announces that he is getting married to a Miss Steele. Or not Miss Steele, Miss Gray. Sorry. Now, Mary Ann does spend most of the novel. She spends almost all of part two and most of part three uh, in a Great Depression. She stops caring for her own physical appearance to the point that other people mention that she is losing the vivaciousness of youth. She stops taking care of her health, causing her to become ill. She stops taking care of how she dresses. She stops leaving the house for a brief period. We would note now that it sounds like she's become very depressed. And it makes sense because this is not just a breakup for her, this is an existential crisis. Her worldview, the one in which one can only fall in love once, means that she fell in love with Willoughby and Willoughby didn't fall in love with her, which means that she can never find a husband. She mentions this briefly later on in the novel, but it is only with Eleanor's steadiness, Eleanor's help, that she is able to eventually overcome this depression. But the first step to overcoming that depression is realizing that Willoughby didn't love her, ever. Because it's worth noting that Marianne believes that Willoughby has abandoned her not for love, but for money. But it is clear, based on Colonel Brandon's story of Willoughby's action, in which he takes advantage of Colonel Brandon's ward, possibly impregnates her, though the novel is unclear on that part. But certainly emotionally abuses the child until he eventually abandons her because of her lack of money. But it is clear that he is not a good man, that he is the kind of man that takes advantage of women like Marianne. And this is the first step for Marianne to realize that love is not this idealized thing. I mean, it's great. Love is wonderful, but it is something to be careful with. It is something that one needs to protect oneself from. Take reasonable precautions, I suppose, is the better phrase. The same way Eleanor does with Edward Ferrars. But even coming to realize what Willoughby is, she's still listless and, as I said, becomes ill because of the way that she no longer cares. She just kind of walks in the rain at one point without a coat or umbrella or anything, and that's what causes her to become sick, is the fact that she just cares not at all for her own well-being. The illness, of course, allows her a chance to think and to contemplate not just her own actions in leading to her nearly fatal illness, but the way that that other characters care for her, the way that Mrs. Jennings cares for her, and the way specifically that Eleanor, her sister, cares for her. And because of after she begins to get better, she relates that to Eleanor, saying, "Do not, my dearest Eleanor, let your kindness defend what I know your judgment must censure. My illness has made me think. It has given me leisure and calmness for serious recollection. Long before I was enough recovered to talk, I was perfectly able to reflect. I considered the past. I saw in my own behavior since the beginning of our acquaintance with him last autumn nothing but a series of imprudence towards myself and want of kindness to others. I saw that my own feelings had prepared my sufferings, and that my want of fortitude under them had almost led me to the grave. My illness, I well know, had been entirely brought on myself by such negligence of my own health as I had felt even at the time to be wrong. Had I died, it would have been a self-destruction. I did not know my danger till the danger was removed, but with such feelings as these reflections gave me, I wonder at my recovery. Wonder that the very eagerness of my desire to live, to have time for atonement to my God and to you all, did not kill me at once. Had I died, in what peculiar misery should I have left you, my nurse, my friend, my sister? You, who had seen all the fretful selfishness of my latter days, who had known all the murmurings of my heart, how should I have lived in your remembrance? My mother, too, how could you have consoled her? I cannot express my own abhorrence of myself. Whenever I looked towards the past, I saw some duty neglected or some failing indulged. Everybody seemed injured by me. The kindness, the unceasing kindness of Mrs. Jennings I had repaid with ungrateful contempt. To the Middletons, the Palmers, the Steeles, to every common acquaintance even, I had been insolent and unjust. With an with a heart hardened against their merits, and a temper irritated by their very attention, to John, to Fanny, yes, even to them, little as they deserve, I had given less than their due. But you above all, above my mother, had been wronged by me. I, and only I, knew your heart and its sorrows, yet to what did it influence me? Not any compassion that could benefit you or myself. Your example was before me, but to what avail? Was I more considerate of you and your comfort? Did I imitate your forbearance or lessen your restraints by taking any part of those offices of general complaisance or particular gratitude which you had hitherto been left to discharge alone? No, not less when I knew you to be unhappy, than when I had believed you at ease, did I turn away from every exertion of duty or friendship, scarcely allowing sorrow to exist with me, regretting only that heart which had deserted and wronged me, and leaving you, for whom I professed an unbounded affection, to be miserable for my sake. Marianne pressed her hand and replied, "You are very good. The future must be my proof. I have laid down my plan, and I am capable of adhering to it. My feelings must be governed, and my temper improved. They shall no longer worry others, nor torture myself. I shall now live solely for my family. You, my mother, and Margaret, and must henceforth be all the world to me. You will share my affections entirely between you. From my home, I shall never again have the smallest incitement to move, and if I do mix in other society, it will be only to show my spirit is humbled, my heart amended, that I can practice the civilities, the lesser duties of life, with gentleness and forbearance. As for Willoughby, to say that I shall soon or that I shall ever forget him would be idle. His remembrance can be overcome by no change of circumstance or opinions, but it shall be regulated, it shall be checked, by religion, by reason, by constant employment." What is notable about this speech, in particular, is that not only does it show how Marianne has grown and adheres to the ideals of reason and Christian morality, but it also takes the place of a love speech in a more traditional love narrative. Think of Darcy's "You've bewitched me, body and soul," or the New Year's Eve monologue from When Harry Met Sally. Uh, this not being a traditional love narrative, as I've said, we don't get any sort of love monologue in the novel itself, not the normal kind at any rate. But if we were to ignore the incestuous connotations of a love speech between two sisters, which I recognize as a big ask, but if we do, Marianne's speech does bear a resemblance to a more traditional love monologue. She delivers it in private, admits her faults, holds Eleanor's hand throughout, and promises a new fidelity on her word as a Christian to Eleanor, ending the speech with the idea that her fidelity is now not to outside people, but to her family, to a new, renewed sense of family, which is very, proposal coded. And that's not out of left field either. I do want to make it clear that this is not like, oh, you're just making things up. No, it is very proposal coded. It is very similar to, as we'll see in the next video, when we talk about Pride and Prejudice, is very similar to Mr. Darcy's, not just his first proposal, but his second proposal as well. As far as Eleanor goes, however, she is certainly one of the more passive of Austen's main protagonists, and there is some truth to what Marianne says about her being such a good example throughout the novel. There is still growth that happens. Despite the novel being in third-person omniscient, Austen was one of the first novelists to develop a technique called free indirect discourse, which, according to our dictionary, is the presentation of thoughts or speech in fictional characters which seems by various devices to combine the character's sentiments with those of a narrator. Austen was a progenitor of this narrative technique, And she uses it throughout the novel throughout all of her novels to give authorial credence to the opinions of her characters. And in Sense and Sensibility, the most common character she does this with is Eleanor. Throughout the novel, we are treated to Eleanor's opinions as though they are the objective truth, when in reality they are actually only the subjective beliefs of a fairly young person. I think she's 19. Mrs. Jennings is the easiest character to see this change of opinion in. We see the opinion that we get of Mrs. Jennings. Mrs. Jennings was a widow with an ample jointure. She had only 2 daughters, both of whom she had lived to see respectably married, and she had now therefore nothing to do but to marry all the rest of the world. In the promotion of this object she was zealously active, as far as her ability reached, and missed no opportunity of projecting weddings among all the young people of her acquaintance. She was remarkably quick in the discovery of attachments, and had enjoyed the advantage of raising the blushes and the vanity of many a young lady by insinuations of her power over such a young man. So we see this Mrs. Jennings described as this kind of busybody, and we might think to ourselves, "Oh, well, this is the objective truth. This is how Austen herself wants us to understand." But we have to remember that though this novel is in third person omniscient, most of it is from Eleanor's opinion, is from Eleanor's understanding of these characters, and we start to see how Eleanor's understanding of Mrs. Jennings' character changes by the end of the novel. Mrs. Jennings, however, with a kindness of heart which made Eleanor really love her, declared her resolution of not stirring from Cleveland as long as Marianne remained ill, and of endeavoring by her own attentive care to supply to her the place of the mother she had taken her from. And Eleanor found her on every occasion a most willing and active helpmate, desirous to share in all her fatigues, and often by her better experience in nursing of material use. Now Eleanor starts to understand that actually Mrs. Jennings is not just some nosy busybody, and we as readers are supposed to understand this with Eleanor, but she is in fact an incredibly kind and generous woman, one which takes up the cause of Marianne and Eleanor in taking them to London with her, but also in staying with Marianne despite her nearly fatal illness, something which the Palmers are unable to do because of Charlotte's newborn baby. But even with the Palmers themselves, we see with Mr. Palmer, for example, how he is originally described as being a conceited and haughty man, very similar to John Dashwood and Fanny Dashwood. But it is discovered upon going to Cleveland, his estate, that Eleanor had seen so little of Mr. Palmer in that little had seen so much variety in his address to her sister and herself, that she knew not what to expect to find him in his own family. She found him, however, perfectly the gentleman in his behaviour to all his visitors, and only occasionally rude to his wife and her mother. She found him very capable of being a pleasant companion, and only prevented from being so always by too great an aptitude to fancy himself as much superior to people in general as he must feel himself to be to Mrs. Jennings and Charlotte. For the rest of his character and habits, they were marked, as far as Eleanor could perceive, with no traits at all unusual in his sex and in time of life. He was nice in his eating, uncertain in his hours, fond of his child, though affecting to slight it, and idled away the mornings at billiards which ought to have been devoted to business. She liked him, however, upon the whole much better than she had expected. So again, this is just Mr. Palmer is obviously just a minor character, and Mrs. Jennings is also simply a minor character, but it is in shaping our understanding that Austen shapes our readers, and in turn shows how Eleanor's, who is the stand-in for us, the reader, how our understanding together changes over time, and that initially Eleanor, though being a kind and generous person, is, however, a somewhat judgmental person, and that throughout the novel she starts to realize that her initial judgments of people are not really all that fair. This is a theme that would, of course, be later on explored in Pride and Prejudice much more thoroughly. Eleanor is more or less a complete character, despite the changes that do happen. The real changes happen with Marianne, but they do happen nonetheless. So, before we end, I would like to take a small moment, to talk about sex. Jane Austen novels are generally considered to be rather sexless books, with good reason. There's no, as I said, there's no real spice in it. Certainly not the, I don't know if gratuitous is the right word, but explicit. The explicit sex of many modern romance novels, obviously aren't here. That would be unpublishable at this time, and certainly unpublishable for a gentleman's daughter, a gentlewoman, if you will, of this time, of the Regency era. But despite the fact that there's no explicit sex, there is a lot of implied sex. Obviously, in Colonel Brandon's story about his first love, we know that she has a love child and therefore is having sex. It is implied that Colonel Brandon's ward likewise has sex with Willoughby. And I would like to put it forward that it is almost certain, definitely sure, that it is implied pretty heavily that Willoughby and Marianne also have sex. They spend an entire morning out in a carriage together alone with nobody there. I think we all know what happened there. Like, it's part of the reason why everybody thinks that they're engaged, because obviously they were having sex. Because I think it's really easy to think that people in the past were more proper, more contained, but that's not true. People were having sex all the time back then. The fact that there are still people here is an indication of the fact that that people were having sex all the time. There's also this idea that Jane Austen herself was this prim and virginal person, and I don't know where that idea comes from. I mean, I know where the idea comes from. It comes from the biography written of her by her nephew, which goes out of its way to talk about the virtues of Jane Austen, because it was in his financial interest to sell Jane Austen as this prim and proper person so that he could sell more books and make more money off of it. But that's not the fact. But that's not the truth of the matter, right? Because at the time that she was writing, there were prostitutes everywhere. Venereal disease was rampant. People were writing filthy things, even by today's standards, and getting it published in penny tracts, not necessarily in full novels like Sense and Sensibility, but certainly these things were being written, these things were talked about, and just because Jane Austen does not explicitly tell us these things were happening does not mean that we shouldn't understand them to happen in the novels. One of the benefits of the Norton Critical Edition of these books, which I highly recommend, because they include a selection of literary criticism, contemporary and both contemporary to us and to the writing of the novel. But my favorite academic writing on Jane Austen ever exists in this copy, and it is Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick's Jane Austen and the Masturbating Girl. In the early 18th century, or the early 19th century rather, masturbation, referred to as onanism after the biblical character Onan, who spills his seed onto the ground. Onanism was considered a paraphilia on par with homosexuality or zoophilia, which are not the same thing, but they were at the time considered to be, again, paraphilias, which is uncommon and unacceptable sexual feelings. Sedgwick discusses the medical literature written at the time, and compares it to the way that Marianne Dashwood is described in the scene in which she's writing to Willoughby, how she is half dressed, flushed, uh, overly emotional, and in her own bedroom, which is not something that happens very often in Jane Austen. But she compares it to the medical texts on girls and women who are suffering from onanism, and how similar they are to each other. But the main point is not to say that Marianne was some sort of sexual deviant, or that there is an incredible amount of sexual deviancy in Jane Austen. That would be somewhat of a ridiculous statement. But Kosofsky-Sedgwick's argument is, as she says, partly to interrupt this seemingly interminable scene of punitive/pedagogical reading, interminably structured as it is by the concept of repression. I want to make available the sense of an alternative, passionate sexual ecology, one fully available to Austen for her exciting, productive, and deliberate use, in a way it no longer is to us. Her point is to say that women, even women in 1808, were sexual creatures, were having sex, did have sexual thoughts, and that we cannot take that out of Jane Austen. That our ideas about the time period should not exclude the actual humanity of Jane Austen or her characters. I think this is very similar to the Tiffany problem. So the Tiffany problem is the issue where modern audiences will find certain facts anachronistic when thinking of the past, despite those facts being accurate. The problem getting its name from the name Tiffany, which comes from the French Théophanie, and was common in was developed in England and France as a name starting in the 12th century, so the 1100s. But if you were to write a historical fiction about the Middle Ages and call somebody Tiffany, people would be taken out, because it sounds so, to modern audiences, it is so tied to like this 1970s California aesthetic that we cannot accept that the name Tiffany actually predates that by a large margin. In the same way, I think a lot of modern audiences understand Jane Austen to be this kind of sexless creature, which she was not. Nor are her novels completely sexless themselves, and we have to keep that in mind when understanding the novels. In Pride and Prejudice, for example, when Lydia runs away with Wickham, the problem there was that they were having sex, and they were not going to get married, and there was a real threat that Lydia would become pregnant, and they would have to deal with that pregnancy outside of marriage. And that if we were to remove the sexual component from that, all of the drama from that gets removed. In the same way, the drama from Marianne's love affair with Willoughby, if we remove the sexual component, then it stops making as much sense why Marianne is so upset and why everybody thinks that they are engaged. It doesn't make as much sense. And so Kosofsky-Sedgwick makes the argument that we should discuss that. We should think about the way that people in Austen's time, and possibly Austen herself, thought about sex. Obviously, we don't know how Austen thought about sex, so we don't know for sure. But we do know how people at the time were thinking about sex, and were writing about sex, and understood sex. So now that I have said sex so much that I will never be able to monetize this video or get it spread, that's what I wanted to talk about. Before we continue, or before we ended, I just wanted to get that out of the way, because this is the first novel, and I do want to keep that. I do want to remind you guys and myself to keep that kind of grounded humanity within these novels, which should be done. So I could go on about Sense and Sensibility more, but I don't want to do that because I think this video is already getting kind of long. But Jane Austen is my favorite writer. I think about her a lot. Well, I don't think about her a lot, but I do think about her novels a lot. And I love these novels. I've read them all before. I will more than likely read them all again in my life. And there's a lot here. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about in all of the books that I read. We do have to editorialize somewhere, but if there are interesting topics that you want me to bring up, by all means do so. And I will do my best to bring them up in the later Austen books. But for now, I'd like to thank you all for listening, for watching or listening, whichever you do. And the next novel will be Pride and Prejudice. If you read it, great. If you haven't, go read it. It's good. But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I really do appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. You know what to do. But I just appreciate you all doing that. So, I'm Steven. This is Reading with Steven. Go out, keep reading.